So, Madam President, we are happy to welcome you at Hromadske and we are happy to see you. Thanks for your time for this interview. So my first question is, you spent some days in Ukraine, you met with the Poroshenko, with some other officials, with the representatives of the civil society. So what can you say? What are the three main things you want to say about Ukraine, about progress, reforms or anything?
I can see that Ukraine has made great steps in changing its society. It is attempting to do steps to change its economic climate for the better so that it will be an even playground for all businesses. I could see that particularly in the east of the country, politicians are thinking how to support SME development. So all this part looks quite hopeful. On the other hand, we know that there has been some stalemate in creation of the anti-corruption court, and there is a problem of internally displaced people, etc. So you have quite a high number of challenges, and the highest among these challenges obviously is the low-intensity war which is going on in eastern Ukraine.
You are well known for your active work with the civil society, with the representatives of the civil sector. What you can advise for Ukrainian authorities how to go through this barrier between the society and government?
You just must accept that civil society and voluntary action normally is directed at the points which hurt the society most and which definitely need quick attention from politicians. And if you accept that, then you realize that cooperation with non-governmental organizations and voluntary groups takes your state forward really quickly. In Estonia, we use this as a model of 21st century public management, that we actually actively seek to create services which are supported both by the government, local government and NGOs. And we have noticed that over the years, NGOs have amassed a huge amount of information and methods, for example, to forward social policies in the country. They are really good think tanks. So supporting them seems simply more reasonable to develop your societies. And it's also guaranteeing you that you are working with issues which matter, because I've not yet seen a voluntary action which deals with matters which are not important for society. And your activity list renews itself constantly, because if civil society loses interest, probably the problem has been solved, gone away, and you can move onwards, which is very different to the traditional public sector services creation, where you for 5 years think what to provide and then provide a uniform service to everybody. This is too costly and too slow for people to get what they really need. And that's why we operate with NGOs. They pinpoint the painful points in the society.
And how can you evaluate this work in Ukraine? I know you have met with some representatives of public sector. What did they say? What do you think?
I have to say that they were very optimistic about particular reforms, healthcare, decentralization, and they see, of course, where you should go further. Like they were very worried about the inactivity, about declarations of economic interest, for example. They were very worried about the creation of the anti-corruption court. So they pinpoint exactly on the issues in the society which are painful. They apply pressure there, and a clever politician, of course, works with them and hears this signal. And I could also see that they have clearly been heard in this society. They were not at all hopeless. They were quite hopeful, I have to say, about Ukrainian development.
Another thing, unfortunately, sometimes Ukrainian-Estonian relationships are remembered in the context of the investment scandals, for example, in Kyiv's Sky Mall and in Odessa's Zatoka, where, as many say, local mafia just tried to seize the money from the investor. Have you raised this issue with the talks with the Poroshenko, and what can you say? Will Estonia continue to invest in Ukraine after all?
First of all, Estonia does not invest in Ukraine. It's Estonian businesses who decide where to invest. And of course, I would be very astonished if somebody right now started a big real estate investment project from Estonia. So these old issues need to be sorted out. And I'm quite optimistic that as Ukraine develops as rule of law, these cases will be sorted out. Definitely, they are very visible in Estonia, and I've heard that also companies from other countries are facing similar difficulties. So indeed, you need to develop your economic climate in general and your rule of law state in general, but people will look at the particularities and concrete cases. If they are solved, I'm quite sure that this will unleash a new wave of interest in Ukraine. Meanwhile, I'm afraid that our companies are still very interested, but I see that most of this interest is in trade, where the loss of heavy investment risk is much lower.
You were an economics advisor to the Prime Minister in the time when Estonia started to introduce the electronic governance system. Ukraine is trying to do so, and after the meeting, President Poroshenko said that Ukraine and Estonia will do this thing in Ukraine. So what were the hardships? What Ukraine should do to make this efficient?
First of all, you cannot compare development of digital state to another state because every state is a culture anyway, and your state culture will prevail also in your digital state. So everybody must find their own ways. Also, you cannot compare digital of the beginning of the century to the digital of today. The risks are different, the opportunities and possibilities nowadays are much better. So you shouldn't be looking what we have been doing, but you should be looking what are your objectives of service provision and use the most modern technology you can afford to use. It doesn't probably need to be very cutting edge, but it definitely wouldn't be exactly the same as we did because time has gone by. And what you need is just the will. And I can see here is clearly the will is present. Of course, Estonian companies also participate in developing of e-services here. It will also help probably to renew our own e-services because we will gather new information and new experiences elsewhere. Not only in Ukraine, we also work in many countries globally, our companies, of course, not the state. And therefore, it's mutually beneficial cooperation. Your digital state will be Ukrainian digital state, not Estonian copied.
And Estonia is the first country to introduce e-citizenship. And can you explain us more how it works? What benefits do both sides get? And what made the country to introduce this initiative?
First of all, to make any benefits from offering e-citizenship, you have to have an economic environment which is useful for business for some, usual reason. Estonia is part of the EU market. Estonia is a stable economic climate. Estonia is a reasonable tax environment where tax bureaucracy is extremely low compared to all countries globally. At the same time, not a tax haven, so trusted by our partners. And all this is there without any e-residency discussion. Now, when we have this environment and we have the tools to offer electronic management of your company creation, then if we open it to e-residents, then they can have an European company in their pocket, functioning everywhere in the world, without much being present in Estonia. So it's an upper layer of our generally good investment climate or economic climate. And these two sides together form the basis for foreign interest also from third countries, but other European countries as well, just operate in an environment where physical presence is not necessary, very 21st century, knowing that technology makes us geographically free, and also where you can rely on the low bureaucracy level, which is becoming more and more of an asset for any economy to develop.
And how society reacted to this initiative at first? And do you think from the perspective of time, is it successful now?
It is very hard to say when exactly you can call a project successful, but 1% of the companies created in Estonia already now, of everything which has ever been created, is created by e-residents. Not all of them are active, all of them are quite small, but still you can see that it does bring also additional economic activity to the country.
And I also want to talk about security a bit. As I remember, a year ago, NATO deployed its troops in Estonia and some other Baltic countries. So from this time, do the country feels more safer, and what it has changed?
May I first remind you that Estonia or any other Baltic country was not without NATO troops before last year, April, because all our armies are NATO troops. A NATO member has a responsibility to protect itself, Article 3, by spending 2% and taking good care of its security environment. We fulfill this. But as the risk analysis of NATO surrounding NATO territory has changed, then NATO provided additional deterrence by organizing 18 member states to participate in NATO battalions in Baltic states and Poland to raise the deterring message, volume.
And in terms of digital and information security, here in Ukraine, as you may know, live in Russian propaganda. There is a lot of this, and it's also spread in many European countries. How do you say we should fight it without limiting the freedom of speech?
First of all, indeed, we must not limit access to information, even if we know it to be propaganda. We can simply tell our people that this we think is propaganda. We must not do anti-propaganda. We must provide balanced information. We must make sure that at least our public broadcasters, if they use public money to broadcast, then their main aim should be being balanced, objective and trusted by our people. We should help private media enterprises to strive for highest standards by self-regulation. According to our model, it can work actually quite well. And then we should talk about these disruptions to media, disruptions to democratic processes, which is false news and STRATCOM exercises by not so friendly powers. This has been done perfectly, for example, by President Macron, who quite soon after his election stood beside President Putin and told, "You interrupted into our democratic election process. I didn't like it." This raises quickly the awareness of the population.
And do you feel any influence, do you feel any Russian propaganda in Estonia?
Yes, all Russian propaganda channels, as I said, they are available in Estonia and people can watch them if they so wish, but we make sure that balanced information is there as well. On the other hand, quite a big part of us lived their youth in the Soviet propaganda sphere, so maybe we are a bit better vaccinated than the Western European people. And they are only learning now what propaganda at this scale means. We have the habit of being very careful about what we believe.
And now it is the time of rise of populism in Europe. We know the governments in Hungary, Poland, Austria. How do Estonia feels in this environment, and what are your next steps? What are you planning in the EU next?
I cannot define populism. President Macron is a great populist, I think, frankly. But he's really a great European as well. Creating simple messaging to your people, forwarding your ideas is what everybody should strive to. I think mainstream just has to strive harder if they want to be heard as well. And people, of course, will gradually also gain experience from working with the governments which originate from these parties who have overpromised. They cannot deliver, this much is clear. And if they cannot deliver, then I believe that people will start to think again that simple solutions are simply not, they don't exist. This way we will overcome it. How much disruption meanwhile to running of our societies, budget balances, etc. we will meanwhile see, who knows. But finally people will see that empty promises are empty promises.
And my last question, I want to come back to my first question. So what can you name in terms of Ukrainian best sides and Ukrainian sectors where Ukraine should do more? For example, also, I mean, like education or what can you say?
I never teach on principle other nations and their politicians on how they should run their country. But what I can tell about Ukraine is, and I'm not surprised, Ukrainian civil society is really well organized and ready to stick together and rise up to the challenges the country is facing. All UN agencies with whom I've talked here has also noted that. And I think this is a common characteristic of your people, that they are essentially very kind people to each other, to their relatives, to their village. And this was great to see and experience also in the eastern Ukraine, where things are so difficult right now.
Thank you, Madam President, for your time and for your answers. We do appreciate that.